If you don't want to rot in a state-funded ward, then pack your bags and get out of my house before I call the police. Those were the words my son, Julian, spat at me, his face twisted in a sneer I hardly recognized. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I stayed completely silent, managing only a faint, unbreakable smile. I walked up to the freezing, uninsulated attic they had forced me to live in, carefully folded my threadbare sweaters, tucked away the velvet box containing my late husband's pocket watch, and clicked my vintage suitcase shut. Exactly 1 hour later, a midnight blue Bentley Mulsanne glided silently up to the front gates of their modern, glass-walled mansion. When my son opened the heavy oak door to arrogantly hand me my bus fare, and saw exactly who was stepping out of the back of that Bentley to open my door, the smug, arrogant smile completely vanished from his face. It was as if the ground beneath his expensive Italian loafers had collapsed into a sinkhole. That horrifying feeling when you look at the child you once cradled to your chest. The child you stayed up with through midnight fevers. The child you taught how to tie his shoes. And realize you were staring into the eyes of a complete heartless stranger. That is exactly what I felt when my son Julian threw me out onto the street. No. Let me be absolutely precise. He threw me out of my own house. That sprawling, multi-million-dollar estate was bought and paid for with the money I had saved over 35 years working as a master jeweler. Every diamond I set, every band of gold I melted and shaped by hand, every burn and callus on my fingers paid for the bricks of that home. I had sold my life's work, my entire successful business, to fund Julian's failing tech startup when he begged me for help, but that rainy Tuesday afternoon in November, none of my sacrifices mattered anymore. I was on my hands and knees in the foyer, aggressively scrubbing the marble floors with a toothbrush. Because according to Vanessa, my 34-year-old daughter-in-law, the professional cleaning service just didn't understand how to make the marble shine, and I needed to pull my weight around the house. The knees of my gray slacks were soaked through with soapy water. My arthritic hands trembled slightly as I gripped the bristles. Julian walked in through the front door, wearing that same impatient, arrogant frown I'd seen since he was a teenager who couldn't get his way. But my husband, Richard, had been gone for 12 years. There was no one left to correct Julian's cruel behavior. The 40-year-old man towering above me was no longer my sweet boy. "Mom, get off the floor! We need to talk." I dried my cracked hands on a faded kitchen towel, pulled myself up with a groan, and gave him a tired, loving smile. "What is it, dear?" Vanessa stepped into the foyer. Sleek, jet-black hair, blood-red lipstick, and a designer silk blouse paid for by my money. She crossed her arms and leaned against the staircase, railing like a spectator waiting for a tragic play to begin. "We've made a firm decision," Julian said, aggressively avoiding my eyes. "This house is just feeling a bit cramped. The twins need a larger playroom. Vanessa needs the attic for her new walk-in closet. And honestly, you're getting older. You're becoming a liability. It's time you found a place that fits your specific needs." My heart thudded violently against my ribs. I knew exactly what was coming. A place that fits my needs? I repeated slowly, my voice barely a whisper in the echoing hall. "You mean a nursing home, Mom," Julian said defensively. Vanessa found some highly rated assisted living communities a few towns over. They have bingo. They have nurses to bathe you. You'll be with your own kind. A nursing home? I cut him off, the words shooting out of my mouth like bullets. "You are trying to lock me away in a facility?" The silence in the foyer grew suffocatingly heavy. Vanessa loudly popped a piece of chewing gum and started scrolling through her phone, perfectly bored by my heartbreak. Finally, Julian looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw something I'd never, ever seen before. Absolute, hollow coldness. Not just a nursing home, Mom. A secure facility. It's practical. The only practical difference, I said evenly, forcing my voice not to tremble, is that you are trying to dispose of me so you don't have to look at the woman you stole from every single day. I wouldn't let them see me break. I wouldn't give Vanessa the sick satisfaction of my tears. Julian's face flushed a violent, ugly red. He slammed his fist against the wall. "Then go! If you don't want to rot in a state-funded ward, then pack your bags and get out of my house before I call the police. His yell echoed through the massive house, bounced off the vaulted ceilings I had painted, and drifted up to the freezing attic I had called my bedroom for 3 years. Vanessa didn't even try to hide her smirk. She looked at me with pure, unadulterated triumph. That was the exact moment something inside me permanently fractured. It wasn't my heart. My heart had shattered into dust a long time ago. It was the final, desperate thread that connected me to the illusion that I still had a family. I took a deep breath, looked at the monster I no longer recognized, and did the absolute last thing he expected. I smiled. "All right, Julian. I will pack my things." His aggressive posture faltered instantly. Confusion mixed with sudden sharp fear on his face. He had expected tears, pleading, a dramatic meltdown. He had expected a scene that Vanessa could secretly record and show her friends to prove how crazy I was, but there was no scene. There was only a chilling, absolute calm. I walked upstairs to the freezing, uninsulated attic at the top of the house. A space so tiny and depressing it looked like a storage closet. I pulled out my old, heavy leather suitcase. The exact same one I had brought with me 3 years ago when I foolishly sold my condo to move in with them. I folded my clothes with meticulous care. Every blouse, every sensible skirt, every scarf I had knitted myself. I took out a small wooden box filled with photographs. Richard and me dancing at our wedding. Julian as a chubby-cheeked baby in my arms. My immigrant parents standing proudly in front of their first jewelry shop. I did not shed a single tear. 1 hour later, I carried that heavy suitcase down the grand staircase. Julian was sitting on the custom Italian leather sofa I had bought them. Vanessa was perched beside him, radiating that victorious, smug energy. When the doorbell rang, Julian let out an annoyed, dramatic sigh. He stood up, muttering about the budget cab he had ordered for me. He yanked open the front door. And his face. I will never ever forget the look on his face. A sleek, midnight blue Bentley Mulsanne was idling silently in the driveway. The driver, wearing a crisp black suit, had already opened the rear passenger door. Stepping out of the back of that magnificent car was a man in his early 70s. He had thick silver hair perfectly combed back, piercing steel gray eyes, and was wearing a bespoke, navy blue Tom Ford suit. It was Arthur Sterling. Arthur was my late husband Richard's former silent business partner, and currently the billionaire CEO of Sterling Global Logistics. He was the wealthiest, most powerful man in the entire state. And he was walking straight up my son's driveway. Julian froze in the doorway, his mouth hanging open in sheer shock. Vanessa practically sprinted to the door, all the color instantly draining from her perfectly tanned face as she recognized the billionaire from the covers of Forbes magazine. Arthur completely ignored them. He walked right past Julian as if my son were nothing but empty air. He walked straight into the foyer, his eyes locking onto me. "Beatrice," Arthur said warmly, a breathtaking smile transforming his serious face. "Are you ready, my dear?" I picked up the handle of my leather suitcase. I turned and gave Julian one final lingering look. "Thank you for everything, Julian. The house is all yours now." I stepped outside into the crisp afternoon air. The arrogant sneer on Julian's face had vanished completely, replaced by an expression of absolute, terrifying panic. As Arthur gently placed his hand on the small of my back and guided me into the plush, fragrant interior of the Bentley, I looked back through the tinted window. Julian was still standing completely motionless on the porch. Paralyzed, watching the mother he had just discarded leave like absolute royalty. And for the first time in 3 agonizing years, I took a deep breath, and I felt completely, wonderfully free. The rich scent of genuine leather and expensive, subtle cologne filled the quiet cabin of the car. Arthur sat beside me, keeping a polite, respectful distance as the massive vehicle glided smoothly out of the gated neighborhood and onto the highway. I gripped the handle of my suitcase so tightly my knuckles turned white. It felt like the only real, solid thing left in my entire world. My hands began to tremble violently. Not from fear, but from a massive, overwhelming crash of relief, grief, and total disbelief. Beatrice, are you all right? Arthur asked, his deep voice incredibly soft. I wanted to say, I'm perfectly fine. I wanted to pretend I was an iron fortress of control. But what actually came out of my mouth was a broken, weary sob. I don't even know how to feel, Arthur, I whispered, staring blindly at my trembling hands. It's all too new. He didn't offer empty my own platitudes. Son. My he only didn't tell child. Me it would be okay. He simply reached out and gently placed his large, warm hand over my shaking fingers. We sat in profound silence, watching the blur of the city drift by outside the tinted glass. Billboards, traffic, pedestrians going about their normal lives, completely unaware that my entire universe had just collapsed and been reborn in the span of an hour. When the Bentley finally glided to a stop, we weren't at a hotel. We were pulling into the private, underground parking fortress of the Sterling Tower downtown. I needed Arthur's arm to help me step out of the car. My legs felt like lead. A team of elite security guards instantly snapped to attention, bowing their heads respectfully as Arthur passed. He smiled and nodded to them, but kept his focus entirely on me. To them, I was just an older woman in a damp cardigan. To Arthur, I was apparently something much more. The private, glass-walled elevator shot us up into the sky. I caught my reflection in the mirrored doors. I looked like a tired, 70-year-old maid. My gray hair was frizzy, my eyes were swollen and red from fighting tears, and my slacks were still damp from scrubbing Vanessa's floors. You look exactly as beautiful as the day Richard married you, Beatrice, Arthur said quietly, not looking away from my reflection in the glass. I let out a wet, bitter laugh. Arthur, you need your eyes checked. I have excellent vision, he replied, and the utter, unwavering sincerity in his voice silenced my self-pity instantly. The elevator doors glided open directly into his private, sprawling penthouse. I actually stopped breathing for a second. The floors were imported white marble. Massive 20-foot windows offered a panoramic 360-degree view of the entire city skyline. The decor was an impeccable blend of modern luxury and warm, historic art. Your suite is down the East Hall, Arthur said, effortlessly lifting my heavy vintage suitcase. You have your own private balcony, a master bath, and a fully stocked walk-in closet. Please, Beatrice, make yourself completely at home. Because this is your home now. This is your home now. Those words echoed in my spinning head as I walked down the quiet carpeted hallway. The bedroom he showed me was easily 3 times the size of the master bedroom Julian and Vanessa shared. A massive king bed was draped in crisp, white Egyptian cotton. The late afternoon sunlight poured through sheer linen curtains, casting a golden, peaceful glow over the room. The air smelled of fresh lavender and new beginnings. I sat down on the edge of the mattress. And the dam finally broke. The tears came. Not tears of sadness, but a violent, exhaustive release of years of pent-up, suffocating pain. I wept for the son I had lost. I wept for the jewelry business I had given away. I wept for the countless times I had bit my tongue and swallowed my dignity just to be allowed to stay near my own flesh and blood. I don't know how many hours I sat there crying. When I finally looked up, the sun had set, and the city below was a glittering ocean of diamond lights. My phone, sitting on the nightstand, began to vibrate violently. Julian calling. I stared at the screen. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. 10 seconds later, it started buzzing again. I hit decline. The notifications began flooding my screen in a panicked wave. 64 missed calls. 42 text messages. Mom, where are you? Who the hell was that man? Mom, please answer the phone. We need to talk. Mom. Vanessa's freaking out. Please tell me you didn't leave the state. Mom, I'm so worried about you. I let out a dry, raspy laugh in the dark room. Worried about me. An hour ago, he was screaming at me to pack my trash and rot in a state facility. Now that he had seen me leave in a billionaire's Bentley, he was suddenly the concerned, loving son. I powered the phone completely off and tossed it into a drawer. A soft, gentle knock came at my bedroom door. Beatrice? I brought you something, Arthur said, walking in carrying a polished silver tray. On it sat a delicate porcelain teapot, a cup, and a small plate of warm, buttery scones. He set the tray on the table by the window and poured the tea in comfortable silence. The rich, calming scent of chamomile, honey, and lemon balm filled the air. My absolute favorite blend. How did you know? I asked, taking the warm cup in my shaking hands. Richard told me decades ago. Arthur smiled softly, taking a seat in the armchair opposite me. We were traveling for business. He mentioned that no matter how chaotic the world got, you always ended your night with a cup of chamomile to find your peace. The mention of my late husband made my chest ache with a bittersweet warmth. Richard and Arthur had been brilliant partners. They built an empire together, holding a deep, unspoken respect for each other. Why did you come for me today, Arthur? I asked, looking him in the eye. How did you even know I needed you? Arthur sighed, resting his elbows on his knees. I wish I could say I had some grand intuition. But it was pure, terrifying coincidence. My driver was taking a shortcut through Julian's neighborhood to look at a property. As we passed the house, I saw you walking down the driveway with that heavy suitcase. I saw the look of absolute devastation on your face. And I saw the cruel, arrogant look on your son's face in the doorway. I understood instantly. He threw me out, I whispered, the reality of it still stinging like salt in an open wound. My own son threw me out like garbage. Arthur's jaw tightened. His gray eyes flashed with a sudden, protective fury. Beatrice, I need to tell you something. Something I have kept buried deep inside me for 40 years. My heart skipped a beat. The atmosphere in the room shifted, growing incredibly still. I have loved you since the very first day I saw you, Arthur said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. The silence that followed was so absolute I could hear the hum of the city far below. From the day Richard proudly introduced you at our first gala, he continued, looking at me with a mixture of profound peace and old sorrow. You were 24 years old. You were wearing a simple yellow dress with tiny white flowers, and your smile completely dominated the room. I knew in that exact second that I had met the love of my life. And I knew that I had missed the one chance of my life. My mind went completely blank. I couldn't process what he was saying. Richard was my best friend. And you loved him fiercely, Arthur said, his voice steadying. So I kept my feelings to myself. I turned them into professional respect. I turned them into friendship. I married my late wife, Clara. I built my empire. I had a good life. But Beatrice... He stopped, swallowing hard. You have always been the only woman who truly owned my heart. Tears spilled over my eyelashes again. I didn't even know why I was crying anymore. Maybe it was the shock. Or maybe it was because, for the first time in an agonizing decade, a man was looking at me not as a burden, not as a maid, not as an old woman in the way, but as a human being of immense worth. Clara passed away 5 years ago, Arthur continued. Softly, I honored my mourning. I waited, but I never found the courage to reach out to you. I thought you were happy with Julian. I thought you had a beautiful life. Arthur stood up. He walked slowly across the room, and to my absolute shock, lowered himself down to one knee in front of my chair. A 73-year-old billionaire titan, kneeling on the floor in front of a woman in damp slacks. But today, Arthur whispered, taking my hands in his. When I saw you walking away from that house with the grace of an absolute queen, I knew that if I didn't stop that car, I would lose you forever. And I refused to lose you again. Arthur, I choked on my words, completely. Overwhelmed, he gently squeezed my hands. You don't have to say a single word tonight, Beatrice. You just need to know that you are safe. You are never, ever going to be alone again. And no one will ever disrespect you as long as I have breath in my lungs. He stood up, kissed my forehead with a tenderness that made my soul ache, a promise, in the form of a touch, and quietly left the room, closing the door behind him. I sat there in the moonlight, staring out at the glittering city beyond the glass, holding a cup of cold tea. For the first time in decades, I felt truly deeply seen. The very next morning, a sharp knock woke me from a deep, dreamless sleep. Arthur was standing in the doorway, already dressed in a sharp navy suit, holding a steaming cup of coffee. He had a dangerous, thrilling smile on his face. "Put on the nicest dress in that closet, Beatrice," he said, his eyes gleaming. "We have a very important appointment." "What kind of appointment?" I asked, pulling the covers up. "Trust me." 2 hours later, after showering and changing into a stunning tailored navy blue sheath dress I found in the massive walk-in closet, we walked into the highest, most exclusive floor of the Sterling Tower. We entered a massive corner office wrapped in glass. A distinguished, bald man in his 60s with wire-rimmed glasses stood up immediately, offering me a deep, respectful bow. "Mrs. Beatrice, it is a profound honor to finally meet you," he said. "I am Oliver Sampson, Chief Legal Counsel for Sterling Global." Arthur pulled out a plush leather chair for me at the massive mahogany conference table, then sat directly beside me. "Oliver, show her the files." Oliver opened a thick, blue leather folder. He pulled out a stack of documents bearing heavy gold seals and slid them across the polished wood toward me. "Mrs. Beatrice," Oliver began, looking at me over his glasses. "Before Richard passed away 12 years ago, did you know that he was the primary patent holder and majority shareholder of a subsidiary called Vanguard Tech Logistics?" I frowned, racking my brain. I knew he had some tech investments, but Julian told me the portfolio went severely bankrupt. Julian said his lawyers advised him to transfer the remaining shell companies into his own name to protect me from the crushing debt. I signed a broad power of attorney so Julian could manage the bankruptcy quietly. Arthur and Oliver exchanged a dark, terrifying look. It was the kind of look that precedes a nuclear explosion. "Beatrice," Arthur said, his voice dropping an octave, turning to pure steel. "Your son lied to you." The room seemed to tilt on its axis. "What do you mean?" I gasped, grabbing the edge of the table. Oliver pushed a specific notarized document toward me. "Richard left an ironclad, notarized will and a pristine patent portfolio. 60% of the Vanguard royalties and shares belong irrevocably to you. 40% was placed in a restricted trust for Julian." I stared at the paper. There was Richard's bold, familiar signature, and right next to it, my name, 60%. "But Julian said the debt. I stammered. "You signed a power of attorney for Julian to manage the assets on your behalf," Oliver corrected firmly. "Not for him to steal them. Those are two radically different things under the law. You are, and have always been, the legal majority owner of the patents." My head was spinning wildly. Too much information, too much anger, too much betrayal. "How much is the portfolio worth?" Arthur's jaw tightened so hard, I thought his teeth might crack. "Beatrice, 2 years ago, Julian used his power of attorney to secretly sell the Vanguard patents to a massive overseas conglomerate. He forged your signature on the final release forms. He has been siphoning the massive cash bout that legally belongs to you to fund his own failing tech startup and Vanessa's lavish lifestyle." "How much?" I demanded, my throat burning. Oliver looked down at the balance sheet. The Vanguard patent belt was valued at approximately $25.5 million. Your stolen shares, including the illegal transfers, compound interest, and forensic valuation adjustments, total roughly $15.3 million in liquid cash that your son has actively hidden from you. $15.3 million. While I was freezing in an uninsulated attic, while I was scrubbing his wife's marble floors on my hands and knees, while they were mocking me and planning to lock me in a state-run Medicare nursing ward, my son was sitting on top of my stolen $15 million fortune. A cold, terrifying calm washed over my entire body. It wasn't grief anymore. It was pure, unadulterated fury. "I want to sue him," I said, my voice so steady and cold it surprised even me. "I want every single stolen cent back, with maximum interest, maximum penalties, and absolute justice." Oliver smiled. It was the terrifying smile of a corporate shark who had just smelled blood in the water. The federal lawsuit is already drafted, Mrs. Beatrice. It simply requires your signature. I took the heavy gold pen Arthur handed me. I signed. All 3 copies. Every stroke of ink was a declaration of total, uncompromising war. Julian will be legally served within 48 hours, Oliver said, neatly stacking the papers. He will have 15 days to respond. But with the forensic evidence we've pulled, the fake asset transfers, the forged signatures, the hidden bank records, he has absolutely no way out. We have him dead to rights. As we walked out of that glass office, my mind was racing. But inside my chest, a new, intoxicating feeling was blooming. Power. On the ride back to the penthouse, Arthur stopped at a quiet cafe and ordered 2 espressos. He looked at me seriously. Beatrice, are you absolutely sure about this? Suing your own flesh and blood. It will be a brutal, ugly fight. Julian will panic. Vanessa will become vicious. They will try to manipulate you. I looked out the window at the city. Arthur, Julian ceased being my son the moment he tried to lock me in a home to steal my money. My self-respect is no longer up for negotiation. Stealing from your own mother comes with catastrophic consequences. Arthur smiled, a fierce pride lighting up his gray eyes. Now that is the Beatrice I fell in love with. That night, I kept my phone turned off. Over 400 missed calls and texts went completely ignored. I slept the deepest, most restful sleep I had experienced in a decade. No guilt, no fear. No regret. 3 days later, Arthur's private secure line rang at 7 a.m. Sharp. It was Oliver. He's been served, Oliver said, his voice crackling over the speakerphone. From the screaming I heard in the background when the process server handed him the envelope. I'd say today is officially the worst day of your son's life. I took a sip of my chamomile tea and looked out over the New York skyline. The sun was rising. And I was just getting started. Julian thought he was a genius. He thought his mother was just a naive, grieving old woman who would quietly fade away into the background. But he forgot one crucial detail. I am the daughter of Italian immigrants. And Italians, when betrayed, take back absolutely everything. 3 weeks passed since the federal court issued the massive summons. 3 agonizing weeks of absolute, agonizing silence from me. I knew Julian was unraveling. Because Arthur had hired an elite private investigator. Not out of petty revenge, but out of cold strategy. Knowing your enemy is half the battle. And yes, my only child had officially become my enemy. That Saturday morning, I decided it was finally time to pull the trigger. It was time to look him in the eye. Not out of nostalgia, not for reconciliation. But because I wanted to watch his empire crumble in real time. I turned my old cell phone back on. The screen practically froze from the sheer volume of frantic, panicked voicemails and texts. I called him. He answered on the first ring. Mom! Oh my God, Mom, thank God. We have been terrified. We need to talk right now. This lawsuit, it's a massive, crazy misunderstanding. I can explain everything to you. Bernardine. Tonight at 8 p.m. you and Vanessa. Do not be late, Julian. I hung up the phone before he could even take a breath to reply. Arthur, lounging on the velvet sofa with his coffee, chuckled deeply. You are utterly magnificent when you are in control, Beatrice. I'm learning from the best. I winked at him. By 7:30 p.m., I was ready. I didn't wear my sensible cardigans or my faded slacks. I wore a stunning, tailored black cocktail dress I had sewn for myself years ago, but never dared to wear. One wore a string of authentic, flawless pearls. My silver hair was professionally styled, falling sleekly to my shoulders. My lips were painted a dangerous, deep red. When I walked out into the living room, Arthur stood up so fast he nearly knocked over his coffee cup. He looked at me with absolute awe. Beatrice, you look absolutely stunning. I smiled lightly. Revenge is a dish best served cold, Arthur. But one can still look incredibly beautiful while serving it. We arrived at Le Bernardine at exactly 8 p.m. The restaurant was the epitome of elite luxury. Massive crystal chandeliers, dim, moody lighting, waiters in crisp white gloves. The Kind of place where a single dinner cost as much as a month's worth of jewelry making back in the day. Julian and Vanessa were already seated nervously in a dark corner booth. When they saw me walking toward them, their faces physically transformed. Julian went paper white. Vanessa's jaw dropped, her eyes widening in sheer disbelief. I was no longer the pathetic, beaten-down old woman scrubbing their floors in damp clothes. I was myself again. The woman they had forgotten existed. I walked toward them, feeling the eyes of the room follow the confident click of my heels. Maybe it was my imagination, but I felt like a queen. Arthur walked right beside me, his presence radiating pure, intimidating power. Mom. Julian jumped up, reaching out, desperately trying to pull me into a hug. I smoothly sidestepped his arms and slid into the leather booth opposite them. Arthur sat beside me. I crossed my legs, looked up at the hovering waiter, and signaled gracefully. A bottle of your best Cabernet, please. Thank you. The air at the table was suffocatingly thick with tension. Vanessa was frantically fidgeting with her cloth napkin, ripping it at the seams. Julian kept glancing at Arthur, terrified of the billionaire sitting across from him. You two look quite polished tonight, I said casually, admiring my own manicure. Vanessa, is that the new Prada dress? And Julian, a custom Rolex watch. Very, very nice. Julian swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead. Mom. Please, about this insane lawsuit. Oh, the multi-million-dollar federal lawsuit? I interrupted, flashing a bright, terrifying smile. Yes, we should absolutely discuss that over. Appetizers. I opened my designer clutch, pulled out a thick brown envelope, and dropped it heavily into the dead center of the table. I want you both to look at this. Vanessa eyed the envelope like it was a live grenade. What is that? She asked, her voice shaking violently. Open it, Vanessa. Read it. Julian aggressively tore the envelope open with trembling hands. The remaining color instantly drained from his face. Inside were high-resolution copies of the forged Vanguard documents, his falsified power of attorney signatures, and the undeniable highlighted bank statements showing $15.3 million being illegally siphoned into his private offshore accounts over the past 3 years. Where did you get this? Julian whispered, sounding like a terrified child. Your father was a very careful, brilliant man, Julian. Did you really think he wouldn't build fail-safes into his own portfolio? He kept copies of everything in a safe. I lied smoothly. When he died, he left me the key. They didn't need to know about Arthur's forensic team yet. Let them think I had been holding the cards the entire time. Mom, I swear to God I can explain this. Then go ahead. I snapped, my voice suddenly dropping into a cold, hard command. Explain it to me, Julian. Explain to me why you intentionally forged your own mother's signature on federal documents. Explain to me why you violently stole $15 million of my retirement fund. Explain to me why you let me sleep in a freezing attic while you spent my money on Prada dresses and luxury cars. The waiter arrived, trembling slightly, and poured the expensive wine. I took a long, slow sip. The dark, rich taste of the Cabernet spread across my tongue, sweeter and more intoxicating than anything I had ever tasted in my life. Vanessa aggressively tried to regain control of the narrative. She leaned forward, putting on her fake, sweet voice. Mother law. Please, we didn't mean to. I slammed my wine glass down so hard the crystal nearly shattered. Do not speak to me, I hissed, locking my eyes onto hers with pure venom. Vanessa physically recoiled, pressing herself into the back of the booth. You have absolutely no right to open your mouth. You are the parasite who treated me like an unpaid maid in the house my money bought. You are the monster who actively planned to lock me in a state-run nursing ward so you could build a walk-in closet. You do not speak. Vanessa went pale as a ghost. How? How did you know about the closet? Because houses have thin walls, Vanessa. And you talk way too loud on the phone when you think you've already won. Julian buried his face in his hands, openly weeping at the table. Mom, please. This is all my fault. Vanessa has nothing to do with it. I was drowning in debt. My startup was failing. I needed the capital to keep us afloat. I was going to pay you back, I swear. Good, I said, leaning forward, my voice practically a low growl. Then admit it, Julian. Admit right now that you stole my money, that you emotionally abused me, and that you threw me out onto the street like a stray dog when you thought I was fully drained. Tears were pouring down his face, soaking the collar of his expensive suit. But I felt absolutely no pity. The well of a mother's forgiveness had completely run dry. I don't even know who you are anymore, Julian, I said in disgust. The sweet, kind boy I raised is dead. All that is left sitting across from me is a pathetic, greedy coward who chose stolen money over his own mother. Mom, I'm so sorry. He sobbed. I let out a dry, hollow laugh that carried across the restaurant. You are not sorry, Julian. You're just terrified because you finally got caught. Because you know that now, you are going to have to give every single stolen cent back, with massive interest and federal punitive damages. I stood up gracefully, grabbing my clutch. Funny, I mused, looking down at them like bugs. I willingly sold my jewelry business, my life's work to invest in your future. And while I lived cramped in a freezing attic, scrubbing your floors, you sat on top of my $15 million and called me a burden. Mom, we will go bankrupt. Julian begged, reaching for my hand. I pulled away sharply. You're high-priced. Lawyers will deal with Oliver Sampson. You will either return what belongs to me peacefully, or the federal court will completely destroy you. And trust me, Julian, going to federal prison hurts a lot more than living in an attic. I turned to walk away, but stopped, looking back over my shoulder one last time. One more thing, Julian. When I eventually pass away, and it won't be anytime soon because I suddenly have a very exciting reason to live a long, luxurious life, do not dare come to my funeral. Do not stand over my casket and shed fake tears. Do not pretend to be a devoted, loving son to your friends. You had your chance, and you threw me away. I walked out of that elite restaurant with my head held impossibly high. Arthur's driver was waiting outside. I got into the car and took a deep breath. Only when the car started moving did my body begin to shake and a single tear rolled down my cheek. Not from sadness, but from overwhelming relief. Because at last, after all these years, I had said everything. But that brutal dinner? That was only the opening skirmish. Because once Vanessa realized she was truly about to lose her luxury lifestyle, the sports cars and the country club memberships, her true sociopathic face finally emerged. The trap Vanessa tried to set for me the following week nearly destroyed everything. And believe me, the absolute worst was yet to come. I thought I could finally breathe. I thought the darkest days were over, and all I had to do was sit in the penthouse and wait for the legal system to crush them. I was incredibly naive. A week later, Arthur walked into my bedroom suite. He wasn't smiling. He had a look on his face I had never seen before. A terrifying mixture of lethal anger and deep disgust. Beatrice, we need to talk immediately, he said, his deep voice making my stomach drop. That tone never brought good news. He sat on the edge of my bed, holding a thick brown envelope. The private investigator I hired to tail Julian and Vanessa's movements. He found something highly explosive. What is it? I asked, sitting up. It's about Vanessa. He opened the envelope and spread a dozen glossy photographs across the duvet. I stared at them in absolute shock. They were high-resolution surveillance photos of Vanessa. She was entering a luxury high-rise downtown. She was leaving an expensive boutique hotel in the middle of the day. And there were several crystal-clear shots of her passionately kissing a man who was definitively, undeniably not my son Julian. The man was younger, wearing a tailored European suit, with slicked-back hair and a smug expression. The kind of man who lived in high-end art galleries, not at home. Who the hell is he? I asked, my jaw tight. His name is Lorenzo Vance. He is a 32-year-old luxury art dealer who operates a gallery downtown where Vanessa has a VIP membership, Arthur explained, his voice laced with venom. According to the PI's tracking, they have been secretly seeing each other for at least 2 years. 2 to 3 times a week, always at that same boutique hotel. A strange, dark wave of poetic satisfaction rose in my chest. So, the perfect, arrogant, high society wife had her own filthy, hypocritical secrets. Is there anything else? I asked. Arthur nodded grimly. He pulled out several intercepted bank statements. Do you remember the charity foundation Vanessa claimed she was running for underprivileged youth? I froze. Yes, Julian donated hundreds of thousands to it for tax write-offs. The charity doesn't exist, Arthur said coldly. It is a shell corporation. Vanessa used it to funnel $850,000 of Julian's money, your stolen money, directly into a joint offshore account she opened under her name and Lorenzo Vance's name. My blood ran ice cold. $850,000. My stolen money, fenced for cash to fund her filthy affair with an art dealer. And look at this. Arthur handed me one final document. Property deeds. She didn't just hide cash. She used the stolen funds to secretly purchase a $1.2 million luxury villa in Aspen, Colorado. The deed is entirely in her name. Everything clicked into horrifying focus. The so-called charity galas and wellness retreats Vanessa had claimed she was attending were actually extravagant romantic getaways with her secret lover, entirely funded by the money they stole from me. Does Julian know about any of this? I asked, feeling a strange mix of fury and pity for my foolish son. Arthur sighed heavily. He does. The pie hacked into their deleted text archives. 6 months ago, Julian found a burner phone in her purse. He confronted her. Vanessa cried, manipulated him, threatened to take half his assets and full custody of the twins in a brutal divorce, and promised to end the affair. Julian completely caved. He accepted it. He accepted it? I was appalled. He is terrified of her, Beatrice, Arthur said quietly. He is terrified of a messy public divorce, terrified of losing the kids, and terrified of being alone. So, the coward chose to bury his head in the sand and pretend he didn't know his wife was still sleeping with her art dealer. I stood up and walked to the massive penthouse window, staring down at the crowded traffic below. My son, the same arrogant man who had the nerve to scream at me and throw me out of my home, was too pathetic and weak to throw out the vile woman who was actively betraying and bankrupting him. Send all of this to Oliver immediately, I said, my voice turning to absolute ice. This changes the entire legal case. What do you mean? Arthur frowned. Vanessa didn't just cheat on him. She actively manipulated my son to gain access to my family assets. She used fake charities to embezzle federal funds to a co-conspirator. That is not just infidelity, Arthur. That is coordinated criminal fraud, wire fraud, and grand larceny. I want that monster in a prison cell. Arthur gave a sharp, terrifying smile. I'll have Oliver draft the criminal referrals to the FBI immediately. 2 days later, I showed up, unannounced at the house that used to be mine. Vanessa ripped the front door open, her face instantly contorting into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred when she saw me standing on the porch. What the hell do you want, you crazy old bat? She hissed, trying to slam the door. I stuck the toe of my expensive leather pump in the doorframe, stopping it dead. I am here to speak privately with my son. Move. She was about to start screaming, but Julian appeared in the hallway behind her. He looked horrific. He was visibly thinner. His eyes were sunken and bruised with exhaustion, and he looked like a man walking to his own execution. Let her in, Vanessa, he muttered brokenly. I stepped into the grand foyer, feeling a bizarre wave of unfamiliarity. Everything was exactly the same. The expensive modern art, the minimalist furniture, the faint scent of Vanessa's expensive vanilla candles, but this place was no longer my home. It was a crime scene. Julian led me into his dark home office and shut the heavy oak doors, leaving Vanessa fuming in the hallway. We stood looking at each other in total silence. I know all about Lorenzo Vance, I said bluntly, dropping the bomb instantly. Julian physically flinched. He grabbed the edge of his desk. His lips parted, but no words came out. I know she has. Been aggressively cheating on you for over 2 years. I know you found the burner phone, and you lacked the spine to leave her. I know she used a fake charity to siphon $850,000 of my money to buy a secret villa in Aspen with him. I stepped closer to him, invading his space. And I know one more crucial thing, Julian. You are an absolute pathetic coward. Mom, it is not that simple, he choked out, tears instantly pooling in his eyes. It is exactly that simple. I shouted, the fury finally breaking free. She manipulates you. She uses you as a human ATM. She violently betrays you in your own bed. And yet, when she told you she wanted the attic for a closet, you chose to throw your own mother onto the street instead of standing up to her. Julian broke down completely. He collapsed into his desk chair, sobbing hysterically into his hands. I'm scared, Mom. I'm so scared. If I divorce her, she will destroy me in court. She will take the twins. She will ruin my reputation. I'm terrified of living without her. In that tragic, pathetic moment, I finally understood the full picture. My son wasn't just a weak, greedy thief. He was fully trapped in a severely toxic, abusive relationship so deep he couldn't even see the bars of his own cage. Vanessa had systematically hollowed him out over the years. She had isolated him, broken his self-esteem, and turned him into a compliant, terrified puppet. A small maternal part of me felt a microscopic twinge of pity. But the much larger, dominant part of me, the woman who had frozen in an attic and been told to go die in a nursing home, refused to forgive him. Julian, look at me. I slammed my hands on his desk, forcing him to look up through his tears. You have to make a choice today. Either you wake the hell up, grow a spine, and realize this woman is actively destroying your life, or you are going to lose absolutely everything. You will lose the startup, you will go bankrupt, you will go to federal prison for the patent theft, and you will permanently lose your mother. He wept harder, shaking his head. I don't want to lose you again, Mom. I'm so sorry. Then do something about it. Prove it. I stood up straight and stepped back. Because if you keep living like a hostage in your own home, you have already lost everything that matters. I turned and walked out of the office. Vanessa was standing dead center in the living room, her arms crossed aggressively. She had clearly been pressing her ear to the heavy oak door, listening to every single word. I walked right past her without breaking stride, but I stopped with my hand on the front doorknob. Oh, Vanessa? I said, looking back at her with a smile. Made of pure ice. I really hope you deeply enjoyed those romantic trips to Aspen with Lorenzo. Because the next trip you take is going to be in the back of a police cruiser to a federal penitentiary. Her perfectly tanned face drained of all color, turning a sickly, ghostly white. I walked out of that house, the heavy door clicking shut behind me. I walked down the driveway filled with something I hadn't felt in my chest in decades. Absolute, terrifying power. But that night, Oliver Sampson called Arthur's penthouse. Beatrice, we have a massive immediate problem, Oliver said, his usually calm voice laced with genuine urgency. My heart clenched painfully. What kind of problem, Oliver? Vanessa just filed an emergency ex parte restraining order against you in family court. She is officially claiming that you violently threatened her life in front of witnesses today. She also filed a separate injunction, demanding the court restrict your contact with your grandchildren, claiming your presence is psychologically harmful to the twins. I froze, the phone slipping slightly in my sweaty hand. That is legally impossible. It's all lies. It's highly possible. And she actually did it, Oliver said grimly. She played the victim card perfectly to the duty judge. The emergency hearing is scheduled for next Tuesday morning. If she wins this injunction, she could temporarily tie up the assets for years in litigation and block you from seeing Leo. And Maya. I dropped the phone onto the couch, my hands shaking uncontrollably. Vanessa had played dirty. Incredibly, violently dirty. And for the very first time since I stepped into Arthur's Bentley, I felt true, suffocating fear. Fear of losing my grandchildren. Fear of never seeing them again. Fear that this venomous, Manipulative monster might actually outsmart the legal system. But Vanessa forgot one very crucial, fatal detail in her desperate panic. You never, ever declare war on an Italian grandmother who has nothing left to lose. Because every single poison has its antidote. And what Arthur and I planned next turned her entire reality completely upside down. That week was the most stressful, agonizing period since this entire nightmare began. I could endure the humiliation of the attic. I could endure the bitter betrayal of my son, but being forbidden to see my grandchildren? That was a line no one could cross. For 3 sleepless nights, I paced the massive penthouse balcony, watching the neon lights of the city below, strategizing with Arthur and Oliver until Sunday every night. Every night. I hired a specialized child welfare investigator to look into Vanessa's parenting while she was busy with her affair. On the morning of the emergency hearing, I did not dress like a fragile, terrified victim. I wore a commanding, tailored dark blue suit. My hair was impeccably pinned back. I looked every bit the powerful, dignified matriarch of a multi-million-dollar estate, not the unhinged, violent stalker Vanessa had painted in her desperate court filings. Oliver picked Arthur and me up at 7:30 a.m. in his private town car. During the tense ride to the courthouse, he reviewed the battle plan one final time. Stay perfectly calm, Beatrice. Do not react to her emotional provocations. Let me handle the aggressive cross-examination. Look at the judge, not at Vanessa. Oliver instructed, tapping his legal briefcase. Be ready. She is fighting for her luxurious life today. She is going to lie under oath through her teeth. The county courthouse was an old, imposing building downtown. The air inside smelled of stale paper, floor wax, and desperation. The narrow hallways were crowded with murmuring lawyers and anxious clients pacing the linoleum. At the far end of the corridor, standing outside courtroom 4B, was Vanessa. She was putting on the performance of a lifetime. She wore a modest, cheap-looking beige cardigan over a knee-length floral dress. Her usually heavy makeup was completely gone, leaving her looking pale and exhausted. Her hair was pulled back into a messy, frantic bun. She wore absolutely no jewelry. She looked like the perfect picture of a terrified, traumatized, innocent mother. Julian stood rigidly beside her, staring at the floor tiles, physically unable to meet my gaze as I walked past them. The hearing room was small, suffocatingly hot, and smelled like old wood. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her late 50s with sharp eyes and a tight bun, slammed her gavel and read the file in a dry, bored voice. Emergency restraining order and child welfare injunction hearing. Case number 44 to 892. Her eyes flicked up to look at us. Counsel, proceed. Vanessa's lawyer, an aggressive, heavy-set man in a wrinkled, shiny suit, sprang up immediately. Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Vanessa, has lived in a state of constant, paralyzing terror since the defendant violently threatened her life. He began, his voice dripping with theatrical empathy. He dramatically opened a thin folder. We have a sworn affidavit confirming the defendant came to my client's home unannounced, cornered her, and explicitly stated, and I quote, "The next trip you take is going to be in the back of a police cruiser to a federal penitentiary. This is a direct, calculated threat to her physical freedom and safety." The judge looked over her reading glasses directly at me. Mrs. Beatrice, do you confirm making this specific statement to the petitioner? Oliver stood up smoothly. Your Honor, extreme context must be considered here before I am asking the defendant, counselor, the judge snapped, cutting Oliver off instantly. I took a deep, centering breath. I stood up slowly, looking the judge dead in the eye with absolute clarity. Yes, Your Honor, I absolutely said those exact words. But it was not a physical threat of violence. It was a factual, legal statement of intent. Whispers rippled through the small gallery. Vanessa's face flushed a blotchy, angry red. Liar! Vanessa suddenly screamed, shattering her fragile victim persona, jumping to her feet and pointing a shaking finger at me. She is violently obsessed with me. She is making this up to destroy my family because she is insane. Order! The judge violently banged her gavel, her eyes flashing with anger. Sit down immediately, Miss Vanessa. You speak only when I address you directly. Vanessa shrank back into her chair, her lawyer putting a warning hand on her arm. Explain yourself. Mrs. Beatrice, the judge commanded, intrigued. What do you mean, a legal statement of intent? Oliver stepped forward, opening his massive, heavy leather briefcase. Your Honor, the plaintiff is actively using this frivolous restraining order as a desperate weapon to block my client from reclaiming stolen family assets and seeing her grandchildren. We have concrete, irrefutable forensic evidence that Vanessa has committed massive grand larceny and wire fraud. She systematically embezzled over $850,000 from my client's accounts through a fake charity. Furthermore, we have evidence of severe child neglect. The courtroom went dead, terrifyingly silent. That is completely outside the scope of a restraining order hearing. Vanessa's lawyer sputtered, clearly blindsided by the devastating detail of Oliver's accusation. He had clearly not been told the truth by his own client. It goes directly to motive, credibility, and child welfare, Your Honor. Oliver countered aggressively, slamming a massive stack of bank statements and the PI's glossy surveillance photos onto the judge's bench. The plaintiff is not terrified for her physical safety. She is terrified of an FBI indictment. She filed this false injunction to freeze the accounts before she is arrested for fraud. Oliver handed the judge the child welfare report. Furthermore, Your Honor, we have photographic evidence that while the plaintiff was spending days in boutique hotels with her extramarital lover, her 7-year-old twins were frequently left unattended. Records of missed school days, skipped meals, Peter waiting outside the school gate at 5 p.m. with no one to pick him up. Julian broke down, burying his face in his hands. I didn't know, God, I didn't know. Because you never looked, I shouted, losing my composure for a brief second. You were too busy being her slave to see she was destroying everything. The judge slowly picked up the glossy surveillance photos of Vanessa kissing her art dealer outside the hotel. She then picked up the fake charity wire transfers. The judge's face hardened into a mask of pure judicial fury. She looked down at Vanessa, who was now trembling violently, openly weeping in her chair as her entire web of lies collapsed in real time. The judge flipped the file closed with a loud, definitive snap. This court finds the petitioner's request for a restraining order to be entirely without merit, highly frivolous, and a blatant abuse of the judicial process, the judge announced, her voice echoing in the silent room. Petition denied in full. Furthermore, based on the evidence of child neglect, I am immediately granting Mrs. Beatrice full, unsupervised visitation rights. And I am forwarding these financial documents directly to the district attorney's office for immediate review of grand larceny and fraud charges. We are adjourned. The gavel slammed down like a death sentence. My world, which had been holding its breath for a week, finally exhaled. Vanessa let out a blood-curdling, hysterical scream. She completely lost her mind in the courtroom, cursing at her own lawyer, throwing her heavy purse across the table. As I calmly gathered my coat to leave the courtroom, Julian stood up. He looked completely shattered, like a man who had just survived a horrific car crash. He looked at me, his eyes begging for some kind of salvation, some kind of motherly intervention. I looked right through him as if he didn't exist. When I walked out the heavy oak doors of the courthouse and out into the bright, blinding sunshine, Arthur was waiting for me by the Bentley. The moment he saw the triumphant look on my face, he smiled, pulled me into a fierce, protective embrace, and kissed the top of my head. She lost, I whispered into his chest, the final remnants of fear evaporating into the wind. No, Beatrice, Arthur rumbled, holding me tight. She didn't just lose. You completely destroyed her. That night, I sat on the penthouse balcony drinking a cup of chamomile tea, watching the city lights sparkle like a million tiny victories. But the final, brutal chapter of this saga was written 2 days later in Oliver's high-rise conference room. I gave Julian one final, devastating ultimatum. He sat across the mahogany table from me, looking hollow, defeated. Arthur sat firmly beside me. Oliver slid a drafted contract across the table. I will agree to halt the federal criminal prosecution for your role in forging the Vanguard patents, saving you from a 10-year prison sentence. I said, my voice cold and steady. But my mercy comes with 3 non-negotiable conditions. Julian looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. Anything, Mom, please. First, you will immediately file for a brutal, at-fault divorce against Vanessa, using the infidelity, embezzlement, and child neglect evidence to claim full primary custody of the twins, and leave her with absolutely nothing in the settlement. He nodded quickly, tears spilling over. Yes, done. Second, you will sign over the entire deed to the suburban house, the house I originally paid for, directly back into my name, effectively evicting Vanessa immediately. Yes. Third, you will legally surrender 100% of your tech startup's remaining assets to my portfolio to partially repay the $15 million you stole, leaving you completely bankrupt. You will attend intense therapy for a year, and you will rebuild your life from the absolute bottom. If he refused even one condition, I would let the FBI prosecute them both to the fullest extent of federal law. Julian, broken, terrified, and finally realizing he had backed the wrong horse, picked up the pen and signed the paperwork within 20 seconds. The fallout was spectacular. When Vanessa was legally served with the divorce papers, the loss of custody, and the immediate 48-hour eviction notice simultaneously, she absolutely lost her mind. She tried to drain their joint checking accounts to flee, only to find that Oliver had already legally frozen every single asset they possessed. She tried to run to her lover, Lorenzo Vance, but the moment Lorenzo realized Vanessa was completely bankrupt and under active federal criminal investigation, he blocked her number, packed his art gallery, and vanished to Europe. It is incredibly funny how fast true love evaporates when the stolen money runs out. Vanessa ended up moving into a cheap, depressing motel on the outskirts of town. 2 weeks later, she was formally arrested by the FBI for felony wire fraud and grand larceny. She took a desperate plea deal to avoid a lengthy trial, and is currently serving 3 years in a minimum security federal facility. As for Julian, he lost his startup. He lost his massive house. He lost his trophy wife. He now lives in a tiny, modest 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet part of town. He works as a junior entry-level coder for a logistics firm, not as a boss, just as an employee. He told me last week, Mom, for the first time in years, I actually sleep well. No debts, no lies, and no poisonous voice whispering in my ear anymore. He has full custody of the twins, and every single Saturday he brings them to my house. 6 months have passed since that terrifying day. I was thrown out of my own house with a single leather suitcase. Today is Saturday. I look at the clock. 9:15 a.m., my heart beats faster. Every time feels just as emotional as the first. The doorbell rings. I open the heavy oak door. Grandma! Maya, my 7-year-old granddaughter, runs into my arms, missing 2 front teeth. Leo follows, trying to act grown up but still hugging me tight. Grandma, we brought all the ingredients to bake cookies. Dad let us pick everything. Julian stands at the door, holding 2 big grocery bags. He looks healthier. The arrogant sneer is gone, replaced by a quiet humility and light in his eyes. Good morning, Mom. Good morning, son. Arthur steps out from the kitchen, wearing a casual sweater and holding a dish towel. Well, are we ready to make the best chocolate chip cookies in the state, my little chefs? The kids cheer and rush to the kitchen. The kitchen turns into a sweet battlefield. Flour everywhere. Maya's hands covered in chocolate. Leo focused on cracking eggs like a scientist. Julian stands next to me, silently whisking the batter. After a while, he stops and says softly, Mom. Thank you. For what? I ask. For not giving up on me, even when I didn't deserve it. I place my cracked jeweler's hand over his. You're my son. I can be angry. I can hurt. But I will never abandon you. I can step back, but I will never turn away. He quickly wipes a tear from his eye. Therapy helped me see that I was emotionally abused and controlled for years. I'm not saying that to excuse what I did to you. But now I understand why I was so blind, and now... He smiles, a genuine, real smile I hadn't seen since he was a boy. Now I feel free. Later that afternoon, when Julian takes the kids to the park, Arthur and I sit together on the massive back patio of the suburban house I reclaimed. The house is mine again. The ghosts are gone. Arthur takes my hand, his thumb tracing my knuckles. Beatrice, you did it. You rebuilt everything. We did it, I say, leaning my head on his shoulder. I couldn't have done it alone. You absolutely could. Have, he laughs warmly. You are the strongest woman I've ever known. We watch the sunset paint the sky in brilliant strokes of gold and orange. You know what I've learned from all of this? I've learned that we do not have to settle for broken pieces. I learned that self-respect is not for sale at any price. And even when life violently shatters us into 1,000 fragments, we can still piece ourselves back together. And when we rebuild ourselves with our own hands, we never return to exactly what we were before. We become something entirely new. They thought they could break me. They thought they could strip me of my dignity, steal my life's work, and lock me away in a dark attic to rot. But they didn't know that I was a master jeweler. I have spent my entire life working with intense heat and crushing pressure. I know exactly what happens when you put gold into